Thank you. The next item of business is a stage 3 debate on motion 19335 in the name of Michael Matheson on the Transport Scotland Bill. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press their respective buttons now? Request to speak buttons now. And can I say there's not an inch of time in hand. I call on Michael Matheson to speak and move the motion. Minister, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you,
Cabinet Secretary, beg your pardon. Cabinet Secretary, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Transport Bill is an ambitious and broad piece of legislation to develop cleaner, smarter and more accessible transport networks and systems. Provisions range from measures to improve bus patronage to improve air quality in our towns and cities, increasing the safety and efficiency of roadworks and addressing antisocial parking. They also make some necessary technical improvements to quite specific areas, for example, ensuring more appropriate financial flexibility and governance arrangements for some public bodies. Additionally, the Government's Transport Strategy amendments agreed yesterday helped to frame the bill around a wider set of outcomes. This builds on the measures already contained in the bill to help Scotland reduce emissions and to play our part in addressing the global climate emergency. This bill received a lot of attention at stage 2 with over 400 amendments which were considered by the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee. Given that the bill is wide-ranging and aspirational, but also quite technical and complex in some areas, overseeing such scrutiny is no mean feat. So I'd like to put on record my thanks for the committee and for the clerks of the committee for its work and the long hours before the summer recess at stage 2. I also want to put on record my thanks to those stakeholders and individuals who submitted evidence to the stage 1 process and who were engaged in the pre-consultation in relation to shaping the bill. And I also want to thank my bill team for the outstanding work which they have carried out over a number of months in ensuring that the bill was prepared properly for presentation to Government and also for consideration at committee and here in the Chamber. Presiding Officer, this Government's vision is for Scotland to have the cleanest air in Europe. The low emission zones provisions within the bill are a key pillar to that commitment, to make sure that we improve air quality as quickly as possible. Low emission zones have the potential to interact also with a host of other transport issues, for example on congestion, active travel and encouraging the uptake of ultra-low emission vehicles. We are also working closely with local authorities to put in place low emission zones in Scotland's 4 largest cities by 2020. The range of views that have been expressed on low emission zones in Parliament, many of them on matters which will have been addressed and will be addressed in regulations at a later date, rather than placed on the face of the bill. Therefore, I am confident that, should Parliament see fit to pass this bill here this evening, the constructive dialogue which we have had through stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3 is dialogue which I am keen to continue with the shaping of the regulations. The draft National Transport Strategy also clearly states that buses are a key part of the sustainable public transport system to help address the climate emergency. This bill offers an ambitious new model for improved bus services and ensures that there are sustainable bus networks across Scotland. Parliament has now agreed measures enabling local transport authorities to operate their own public passenger transport services should they choose to do so. We will work with local transport authorities, the Competition and Markets Authority and others to develop clear guidance on this matter. Moreover, the bill will improve the information on bus services available to passengers, helping them to plan their journeys. And I will also help accelerate the implementation of the smart ticketing across Scotland. Additionally, the prohibition on parking and double parking will help ensure that our pavements and roads are accessible for all, particularly those with mobility considerations. And I particularly welcome the cross-party approach which we've had to this, and I believe that the balance which we've struck within the bill is the right one in order to tackle this issue. The Green Party amendments on workplace parking levies have generated considerable debate. the measures have there is discretionary power to local authorities, and I must emphasise that it is a power and not a duty. Such schemes can help reduce congestion and tackle emissions by influencing travel behaviour, and they have the potential to be a valuable tool in helping to deliver local measures to address the global climate emergency and to improve tackle climate change. Presiding Officer, this bill's provisions on roadworks will also enhance our current framework and improve quality, safety and performance, and also gives flexibility to regional transport partners and Scottish Canals Board. Presiding Officer, for these reasons, I would urge members across the chamber here this evening to support this bill.
Thank you very much. I call on Jamie Green. 4 minutes, please, Mr Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I give my comments, I'd like to thank members of the Rural Economy Committee, the clerks of the committee, and also the parliamentary clerks who have helped draft amendments. It's been quite an onerous process on them. I'd also like to thank my own members of staff who've had very many late nights drafting amendments, at both stages 2 and 3. But I'd also like to thank the Cabinet Secretary and his team for being fairly constructive throughout this process. There have also been a large number of external organisations who have taken great interest in this bill, I think for obvious reasons, the content of which are of great interest to people outside of this building. I've met with many external organisations, councillors and indeed members of the public who've contacted us in great numbers with their own views and concerns over the bill. Overall, I think the bill was a positive process, but equally I'm disappointed in the final direction that the bill took. And let me put on record that there is a lot to be positive about in the Transport Bill, and there are a lot of measures in it that the Scottish Conservatives do support, and I'd like to address some of those. First of all, on low emission zones. Perhaps this is a shift, personally, from where I originally stood on the matter when I joined this Parliament, but I do see the goodness in low emission zones. I have gone through a journey in understanding what they will do to improve air quality in our cities. We have tried to amend the bill as best we can to get it in a better place, but I think low emission zones, if cities choose to set them up, I do wish them the very best. I hope that in the future there's no need for a low emission zone because they will have fulfilled their objectives. And I do hope that is an aspiration for all of us. On other issues, the bill worked on improving parking in our towns and cities. The issue of pavement parking absolutely is a scourge in our towns. It does need to stop. And I think that element of the bill will address that. But I also voice concerns about the approach of the bill. I think plans to ban it completely at the time when it was presented to us seemed impractical and unworkable. I'm not convinced, actually, even to this day, at stage 3 of the bill, that people outside of this building understand fully the consequence of what the ban will mean. I'm not entirely convinced that local authorities are aware of the exemption process or how to go about it, and neither am I confident of the enforcement that will take place around this issue. Where on earth are all these cars going to go once they're moved off of the pavement? Now, I don't have an answer to that question, and I'm not sure that any of us do, and that in itself poses a problem that the bill presents us. The other issue, the major aspect of this bill, was the bus franchising area, and I support, again, the ability for local authorities to run bus services if they choose to do so. Again, that's a surprising shift in opinion from perhaps historic views that these benches expressed in that matter. But I took that decision because I think it seemed the right one to do, and for that reason we supported Labour at stage 2. However, we also created, as I said yesterday, a bit of a mess at stage 2 in the legislation, and I hope that the end product is one that is fair, that allows those who currently operate in the commercial environment the ability to do so in a fair and transparent way, but also gives that extra power that I think we all want to see local authorities have. But alas, and just a final point in the unfortunate short time I have to speak at stage 3 on this, is that the matter of the workplace parking levy, we've had a lot of debate on it, and in my closing seconds, I just want to say that we put forward a series of what I thought were very sensible and reasonable amendments to exempt a whole series of workers from this piece of taxation. Every single one of those amendments was voted down by the government. This Parliament did not endorse that policy at stage 1, and nor would I have signed up to it if it was in the stage 1 report. Now, this was always going to be controversial, I accept that, but I don't think, again, that is how good law is made. It has undermined the parliamentary process, the committee process, but also structurally, I don't think that's how bills should be presented. It is with huge regret, therefore, that these benches will be voting against the transport bill at decision time because of its inclusion of the car park tax. And given everything I've heard in the last 24 hours from members of the public, those who do support the car park tax today will rue the day they did.
Thank you. Call Colin Smith. 4 minutes, Mr Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I also place on record my thanks to the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, the committee's clerks and assistants, the many stakeholders who gave their views on this bill, the Parliament's legislation team for their outstanding work, and also the Cabinet Secretary's staff who discussed a number of issues with myself and my team. Now, this bill was an opportunity to transform our transport system, to lay the groundwork for the greener, fairer, more accessible transport system that we need. But in many ways, it has been a missed opportunity. The proposed low emission zones in the bill introduce a much needed framework that will contribute to meeting our climate change aims, and are very much welcome. But given this legislation will shape LEZs for the foreseeable future, it needs to be fit for purpose, and the final proposals in the bill, in my view, are not. The bill was a chance for the Scottish Government to move forward with the commitment in this year's programme for government to, and I quote, make the transformative shift to zero or ultra-low emission city centres by 2030. But when it came to voting on my amendment, which would have allowed for the creation of ultra-low emission zones, the SNP, the Tories and Lib Dems voted it down. It's therefore hard to see the pledge in the programme of government now as anything other than empty words. The grace period set out in the bill also failed to recognise the urgency of our climate crisis and mean that LEZs may not be fully up and running for 6 years after they are introduced. It might be a climate emergency when it comes to the government's rhetoric, but it's certainly not when it comes to its actions. The bill also is a missed opportunity to deliver a more equal Scotland. I attempted to amend the bill to require bus service improvement plans and franchises to meet the needs of those living in poverty and those with protected characteristics. I sought also to ensure that companies who receive taxpayers' money to provide services make those open to all, providing information in accessible formats on request, such as bus timetables in Braille for the blind, and ensure that drivers undergo regular disability awareness training, all entirely within the powers of this Parliament. But shamefully, I have to say, these were voted down by the SNP and Tories, and a real betrayal of disabled people. The ban on pavement parking is also welcome, but it could also have been stronger. Parking on pavements is not just a nuisance, it's a hazard. But my proposal to move the exemption regarding deliveries from primary to secondary legislation would have closed a potential loophole in the ban by making it easier to adjust if required. And the failure of the SNP and Tories to support my amendment closing a loophole that still allows parking in cycle lanes has rightly been described by Cycling UK Scotland as a squandered opportunity. No wonder the record on promoting cycling in Scotland remains so woeful. The one area where we have seen progress in stage 1 of this bill is on bus ownership, however. The bill originally tinkered around the edges of our failed deregulated system. My amendment to the bill at stage 2 brought to an end the ban on local councils setting up local bus companies, giving councils the power to help end the dismantling of lifeline bus routes and put a stop to rip-off fares. I welcome the government's support for this move through their amendment at stage 2, and I want to pay tribute to everyone who so successfully campaigned for this change. Our trade unions such as Unite, the Co-op Party, Get Glasgow Moving, Friends of the Earth, and also colleagues in this chamber such as Ian Gray, who previously brought forward proposals for a members' bill to lift this ban. But if we want this power to become a reality, if we're serious about improving our environment, we have to provide support for our councils to establish municipal bus services and invest in public transport, not keeping the council budgets being cut that are needed to make that investment. But what won't protect our environment is the ill-thought-out, short-sighted car parking tax. The fact that the SNP and Greens voted against exempting electric vehicles and exempting those in poverty from this attack on workers shows it's nothing to do with emission lowering and everything to do with revenue raising. But a sticky plaster won't cover the gaping wound in local council budgets. No wonder every trade union is opposed to it. And, Presiding Officer, Labour makes no apologies for being on the side of workers and making it clear that we cannot and we will not support this car parking tax.
Thank you very much, Mr Smith. Paul John Finney, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. I think this is a very positive piece of legislation, and like colleagues, I would like to thank the committee staff, the civil servants, all those who contributed, the people who have provided briefings, and not least the long-suffering Archie for all his, and hopefully gets his life back now. I think the Cabinet Secretary at the outset said this is strategy, it's about framing, and that is how this has to be seen. We're responding to climate breakdown, a global emergency regarding the state of the climate, and I think this is just but one small part of how we should respond. I think the low emission zones Very positive. It's not a piece of paper. It is going to be something that's going to address the several thousand folk in Scotland that die each year due to poor air quality. That's not a matter, I keep saying in this chamber, that's not a matter that's restricted simply to our major cities. In the town I live in, there's a poor air quality zone there. So quite the reverse of encouraging people to come into these town centres, we should be encouraging people to keep their vehicles out of them. Part of that is providing good public transport, and I'm delighted. I know there was a lot of people campaigned in different ways. Colleague Colin Smith mentioned some of them. Scottish Greens ran a better bus campaign, and I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to that. And I think there's been a lot of discussion, particularly during the amendment session, about how the mechanics of this bill played together, and criticism said. I think with regard to the buses, we saw a situation where the government responded. They responded to what was a growing... I appreciate they felt they had to do checks, but we are in a position now where all the parties in this chamber are supportive of our local authorities having the opportunity to run buses. The previous situation whereby it was where there was no commercial profit to be made was never going to be an attractive option. So I think that is very positive. And I think my colleague Jamie Green was very frank and honest when he said that he had personally gone through a journey in respect of this. And I understand. I mean, I'm a car owner. The idea that some of these policies are attacking car owners is incorrect. You can't have a situation where everyone's content to say there's emergency, but the status quo prevails. So I think there's a lot of us will go on a journey. What the Scottish Greens, of course, would like to see is a lot more folk go on free journeys. And we would like to see the extension of concessionary travel to under 26. And that is, again, I've often mentioned Lothian buses moving into East Lothian and arresting the decline of passengers by particularly targeting young people. We need to get people into the habit of using public transport. We also need to encourage people, of course, to be involved in active travel. So I was very pleased and grateful to members across the chamber for the support and respect of something that I said that Age Scotland and indeed COSLA wanted. That was the issue of the road orders, and I appreciate, as we know from other events, that the Cabinet Secretary is going to be undertaking a review of that. I think that in the short time I have, I'm going to keep it positive. I think that there's many negative things that could have said about the conduct of this debate. I think it's important that all in here, regardless of what position we take in certain matters, we understand that people hold views strongly and respectfully. So I would only urge members to perhaps have a look at the work reported today of the UK government, the UK Parliament's Transport Committee, which I read just before coming in here. Ministers consider pay-as-you-go road pricing to fill car tax black hole. Now, some of the other things they're going to do are going to charge for emission zones, and they're also going to introduce something called a workplace levy. So it's these options. So there's nothing new in what we've done. It's fairly modest, but I have to say I think it's a good piece of legislation. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Mike Rumbles. 4 minutes, Mr. Rumble.
When the committee produced our Stage 1 report on the bill, we were heartened by the Transport Secretary's response to it. We felt that there were major improvements to the bill, such as ensuring that our local authorities were able to establish their own bus companies that would not be subject to them only running on unprofitable routes. What company would ever have been set up on that basis? Michael Matheson responded in the right way and changed the bill. I worked with the Cabinet Secretary to see if we could reach a reasonable compromise over pavement parking. We did, and the government supported my amendments to ensure that a minimum width of 1.5 metres would be left clear. A real improvement, and as I said yesterday, well done, Cabinet Secretary, for listening and taking and indeed supporting the correct action to improve the bill. Now, that's how legislation here is supposed to work. Improving the transport bill was going very well until 20 completely new sections of the bill were just dumped at Stage 2. Yes, these were on the workplace parking levy. And yes, this bill, to use a familiar analogy, seemed to have been a game of two halves. Now, we all have our differences on the need for this new levy. The two nationalist parties want it, and the non-nationalist parties don't want it. I haven't got time for intervention. We're short of time. Absolutely right and proper to put down amendments to take this new measure completely out of the bill. And completely right and proper for the two nationalist parties to vote against these amendments. So the attempt to remove this measure from the bill failed. However, once that had happened, we moved on to other amendments on this subject with the aim of making, in our opinion, the Liberal Democrats' opinion, a bad measure better. But every single amendment, every single one on these 20 new sections of the bill were voted down. All opposition amendments were voted down by the two nationalist parties. But here's my point. No amendments were even lodged by backbench nationalist MSPs to improve these 20 sections of the bill. They wouldn't even do it themselves. It was apparent to me that we have had two approaches to this bill. Firstly, the Scottish Government recognised that they weren't the fount of all knowledge and were amenable to amending it. But when we came to these new 20 sections of the bill on the workplace parking levy, suddenly they couldn't be improved. Amazing. The government is obviously infallible. Now, it's a disappointment to me to see such naked tribalism in action. I well remember the first three sessions of Parliament from 1999 to 2011, when parties, while having major differences, could at least work together to produce good law. I wasn't here in the previous session, and I'm glad that if I had to miss one, then that was to be the one. And why? Because I was told and could see from afar that pushing through legislation without full scrutiny and amendments produced bad law. However, here we are again, it seems. This time it's two nationalist parties pushing the workplace parking levy through without amendment that is making bad law. So, Presiding Officer, even though there are good measures in this bill, like enabling our local authorities to set up unfettered bus companies to run profitable routes as well as unprofitable ones, and we have the much-needed ban on pavement parking, we have the creation of low-emission zones, all very good things. But the Liberal Democrats cannot support the creation of a bad law, and we'll be voting against this bill at decision time. I have to say, for the Labour Party to say that they're against the workplace parking levy and then at decision time to vote for it, well, that says everything about the Labour Party. Far be it from me to intrude on personal grief on the Labour benches. The correct course of action would have been for MSPs to vote down at decision time, ask the Scottish Government to bring back a new transport bill with these good measures that we could have all supported.
Thank you. Open debate. Speeches of 4 minutes. Sandra White, followed by Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I hope I can bring some joy to this transport bill, basically. First of all, can I start by thanking the committee members and also the convener for allowing me to attend the committee as well, the clerks as well, for all the work they have carried out on what really has been a mammoth task, covering many, many issues. But today I want to concentrate my remarks on one aspect of the bill: pavement parking, double parking and dropped footways. Now, I mentioned just earlier there about the mammoth task of the committee, but it really is nothing compared to the years it has taken to get responsible parking legislation through this Parliament. Years. I introduced my bill in 2012, believe it or not. And before that, and I must thank Ross Finney, who's a Lib Dem MSP, who introduced the bill also, and to Joe Fitzpatrick, MSP, who also introduced the bill. And I thank them most sincerely for all the work that they carried out on this. And it really was an honour for me to take this forward again in my own bill to start in 2012 as well. And I do thank Guide Dog for the Blinds and Living Streets and all the other individuals and groups who helped make this come to fruition. And I really am appalled if the Conservatives and the Lib Dems vote this down. You're talking years to get something that gives people justice and responsible parking, and they will vote that down just because of certain aspects of the bill. I've only got 4 minutes, I'm sorry, Jamie. I mean, it really pains me to say that. I mean, during the consultations and going out and meeting people and people in this Parliament, we heard real horror stories. Not just me, but every MSP from all parties heard the story of the gentleman who was blind, who was walking along the pavement. His stick snapped against a lorry, which was parked on a pavement. That man was absolutely stranded on a pavement for hours until somebody actually came along and asked them if they could help him off the pavement. We heard the horror stories of people with their kids in buggies and prams having to go off a pavement to walk along a street. This parking, responsible parking, what's in this bill, and I do thank the government for looking at my bill and taking that on board, the predecessor of the Transport Minister, because this is something that matters to every single person, but more so that matters to vulnerable people, disabled people, older people, people with young families. And do you know what it gives them? It gives them something that every single one of us have at the moment. Independence, to be able to move about. It makes them the same as us, and it makes sure that these people can get out and about. We had horror stories of people not being able to get out the house because they were frightened. They got out of the house, they had a wheelchair, there's a drop curb, there's a car parked in front of it. They couldn't even get to the shops or anything. And I say, please look at this bill in its entirety. You might not like some of it I don't particularly like either, perhaps, but this is important for the people. This is important for ordinary people out there to get justice for a change. And we talk about car owners. I don't want punitive measures. I want education for car owners, because I'm sure they don't want to punish people who are vulnerable and people that can't get on the pavements and can't get off the pavements. But you look outside and you see people, guide dogs, it's obstacles in their way. And pavements should be for people. And we've worked years and years and years to get this legislation through this Parliament. So please vote for it tonight and ensure that the people out there who are suffering, who have horrific stories to tell us, can actually get about and actually say, I can go out today, I know I won't be stuck on a pavement, I know I won't have to go on the road. I can't wait to see this legislation enacted. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms White. Edward Mountain, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've watched and worked on this transport bill from the moment it was introduced into the Parliament. As a member of the REC Committee, I worked to rectify the limitations of the bill with the rest of the committee when it was introduced. And I'd like to thank all members of the committee and the clerks for their diligence on this. Many of the provisions regarding LEZs, bus franchising, pavement parking have been improved in such a way that I believe that they work for Scotland and are improving our streets, roads and environment. And I and those people and those colleagues of mine on these benches support these. There were high expectations for the bill, but suddenly, at stage 2, out of the blue came the Greens with their working place parking levy, a proposal that has resulted, I'm afraid, from a backroom dealing with this government. A deal to get the government budget through at the expense of those who work to support their families and indeed Scotland. Presiding Officer, I live in a rural area and I know that transport is critical and people want properly maintained roads, more reliable buses, trains that run on time and don't skip their stations, new and reliable ferries built on time and on budget, and airports that don't close before the last flight has landed. These are the things that the government, which has now been in power for 12 years, haven't delivered. But what they have delivered is a charge that many councils will be forced to use due to a lack of central government funding. I believe the car parking tax is a tax on workers, a regressive tax that will hurt the low paid. It will hit shift workers, the police, fire and rescue staff, charities, health and care workers, residential home workers, vets, to name but a few. Not high-paid workers, but everyday normal Scots who go to work to support their families. Now, I say you can't hide behind the fact that what you will say that this is a decision for local authorities. But if you don't fund them, they'll have no option but to look to use it. And I know there are many on the government benches that feel as uncomfortable about this tax as I do. And they were initially prepared to speak out. Where are they now? Invisible, and not on the side of those who will face this tax. And the hypocrisy of this tax, in my mind, it is being sold as an environmental tax when it is clearly not. I ask the simple question, will those that can afford to pay this tax and perhaps ride round in company cars driven by others change their behaviour? I think not. Presiding Officer, the people of Scotland wanted better roads, better transport networks, but this transport bill that promised so much, I believe, punishes them with an unfair tax instead. Now, the Scottish Conservatives would have supported the transport bill, and I wanted to support this bill until it was hijacked by those who want to punish workers, because the public system that those workers rely on isn't working. We put forward amendments which would have reduced the harm caused by the working class levy. but this heartless government voted against each and every one of them. Yeah. This SNP government is intent on introducing a fair and regressive tax, and I don't believe they care about the damage it will do. I will not support policies that penalise hard-working Scots, and for that reason, and very sadly, I will be forced to vote against the Transport Bill.
Thank you. I call Polly McNeill, then closing speeches. Ms McNeill, please.
It's been a marathon bill at committee stage and in the Parliament, and I'm wondering what it is we have ended up with. I do thank the committee convener and the committee for an incredibly hard job they did over this, and Colin Smith and Jamie Green in particular for championing the cause of the workplace levy. There are things in the bill that I agree with, municipal bus ownership and the importance of improving air quality. I would have liked my amendments at stage 2 to have been accepted, which is to extend half fare to 16 and 17-year-olds on buses and trains, but that was not to be. But my most serious concern about the bill is the lack of scrutiny in certain parts of and that has really exercised me, and I believe we would be the poorer for it. I think it was a mistake to do this. I think it was a mistake for the reputation of this Parliament to do it. And never mind the consequences of some of the legislation. 2 members' bills put into one piece of legislation without any evidence taken, in one case at stage 1 and only a few weeks in stage 2, and a completely new section on the working park levy. I think this is an unfortunate precedent, and I would certainly put an appeal out to ministers not to allow this to happen again. There will, in my view, be consequences of both the issues I raised earlier on keepers' liability. I won't cover all the points I've made previously on the exemptions that I believe should be in place on the workplace levy, a tax designed to get people out their cars. I believe the inconsistency of exempting NHS workers but not police officers seems extraordinary to me, and the inconsistency of having a national anti-poverty strategy but not exempting those people that you're trying to help is beyond me. I don't think there has been due regard given to shift workers, to women workers, and the evidence shows that women will probably fare worse if a workplace levy was introduced. Helen Martin from the STUC gave her evidence and said that as a working mother, I was always chasing my tail, working through my lunch, and the idea of adding another train or a bus journey as part of my journey to work would be untenable for me. I'd like clarification from the Minister at the end. I've asked for before. This money, if raised by local authorities, is not ring-fenced for public transport projects. I think what the Minister said was it was ring-fenced for public transport strategies. And as I've said previously, I would have at least had some respect for the policy if the money raised was going to be ring-fenced. Because in the case of Glasgow, it's going to be decades before we have a transport system that is really fit for the purposes of being able to apply our workplace levy. I used the example in previous forums about a constituent of mine who cannot get a bus from the Queen Elizabeth Hospital at 6 o'clock at night when she visited her daughter home to the south side of Glasgow. That is the state of the public transport system in Glasgow. It is not ready. There are not choices for people. Even Sustrans came to the committee and said that there should be exemptions for low-paid workers, but not this Scottish Government. The Scottish Government do not think there should be exemptions for low-paid workers. This is a tax on workers. I don't think local authorities are likely to make any further exemptions because they've been advised to make it a simplified scheme. In closing, presiding officer, which I will do now, the keeper's liability issue to me, this Parliament will regret that we put this in the bill. There will be casualties of this because we did not scrutinise it properly. I am sad to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Colin Smith, please, to wind up for Labour. Oh, I beg your pardon. I've forgotten somebody. No, I am right. You're wrong. Oh, that makes it. I ask you. We can't get this staff, Colin. Colin Smith, to wind up for Labour, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I have to say this debate has done little to allay Labour's concerns that the Transport Bill has in many ways been a missed opportunity. We support the introduction of low emission zones, but an opportunity was missed to strengthen them. We support the ban on pavement parking, but again an opportunity was lost to close potential loopholes. Labour's worked hard to improve this bill, and I want to place on record my thanks to my researcher Meg for her amazing work developing a positive, constructive alternatives. It's our birthday today, and I have to say, what a way to spend it. But Labour put forward sensible, constructive proposals to make public transport, for example, more accessible to disabled people and properly enforce a ban on parking in mandatory cycle lanes. On the day the SNP voted for a car parking tax, they voted against making cycling to work safer. Go work that one out. But as I said in my opening speech, Labour does welcome a decision by the SNP to drop their opposition to Labour's call to lift the ban on councils running bus services, to empower our local authorities to play their part in stemming plummeting passenger numbers and rocketing fares. The potential to expand municipal ownership is one of the most important changes this bill now makes, thanks to pressure from Labour. It's a chance to move away from the fragmented, privatised bus system, a chance for councils to take services back into public hands so they're run for passengers, not profit. But we now need the political will to put into practice these powers and others introduced in the bill, such as bus service improvement plans and franchises. Labour will play our part through local councils right across Scotland, and I hope others will do the same, including the SNP government, by properly resourcing our councils to deliver bus services for our communities, instead of voting through budget after budget after budget that cuts those resources. Because if we really want to use cars less, we need transformational change in public transport. That's how it will be achieved. It won't be achieved by a regressive car park tax, which was an afterthought in the Transport Bill, a proposal the government tried to sneak through as a late amendment, igniting a backlash that I believe will undermine public support for proper environmental action for decades to come. And I have to say, no wonder people are angry. What signal does it send when, fresh from voting for a car park tax on workers, SNP ministers went home from Holyrood last night and the fleet of chauffeur-driven cars parked outside this Parliament paid for by the same workers? And the MSPs who voted against Labour's amendment to scrap the tax last night, between them have claimed in car hire, mileage, taxes and car parking, yes, car parking, £304,342 from the taxpayer. Even if they were determined to drive through this tax, those MSPs could have tried to make it fairer. They could have supported Labour's amendments to exempt electric cars and low-paid workers. Instead, as it stands, a company boss could be asked to pay the same as a company cleaner. A chief executive of a health board on over £100,000 a year will be exempt, but a carer working for a charity on the minimum wage will have to stump up. That's simply not fair. Many of my constituents travel from rural areas with poor transport links to cities for work. Under the car park tax, they will pay hundreds of pounds to their neighbouring councils, such as Glasgow or Edinburgh, but not a penny will be spent on improving public transport in the council area where they live, where they do not have that transport because of a lack of strategic thought from the government. That's why it was Labour who put forward the amendments to this bill to scrap the car park tax. And that is why, when this bill passes, as it will, with the votes of the SNP and Greens, we will make it clear that in our manifesto for the next Scottish Parliament election, there will be a clear commitment from Labour. Labour will scrap the car park tax.
Thank you. I call Liam Kerr, close to the Conservatives.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I close for the Scottish Conservatives on the Transport Bill with a sense of disappointment, as we will not be able to vote for it. Fundamentally, this is a good bill, improved by the extensive amendment that has taken place. We believe that low-emission zone schemes are a good thing and could prove fundamental in tackling climate change. We are supportive of local franchising, but we believe that this should be done in a considered manner, with local authorities being clear with their electorate what the long-term impact will be on local public transport links and council budgets. We support smart ticketing, but feel that ministers could have taken a more ambitious approach. And I'm pleased to see Parliament taking action on tackling obstructive parking, which has detriments not only for local residents, but particularly affects people with disabilities or visual impairments. These are positive proposals that could have a significant impact on our transport framework. However, we cannot vote for a bill into which a car park tax has appeared. And I choose my words because, of course, this provision was not there originally. Questions have to be asked about a process which sees Parliament agree to the principles of a bill, then has an entire tax regime inserted. And incidentally, I'd just like to pick up Jamie Green's point of order earlier, which I think was spot on. I've got 4 minutes to speak on primary legislation which had hundreds of amendments, in which a whole new tax has been inserted without evidence, and in which the final debate is significantly curtailed. If there's no time for interventions and challenges, can we really say that we're debating? It is a measure, the car park tax, that has simply not been thought through. with no economic analysis and no consultation with businesses or stakeholders before it was proposed. Yesterday, Murdo Fraser flagged that although it looks like a Green amendment, it appears the idea was first put on the table by the Finance Secretary. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because had evidence been taken at stage 1, from Mike Rumble's comments, it appears that we would have learned that this tax does not lead to the behaviour change that is apparently the underlying principle. In fact, the evidence suggests it might lead to increased congestion. The clear implication is that this is revenue generation dressed up as green virtue signalling. And as Edward Mountain said, that of course is the answer to why the government are so keen to get this through and say it's a local authority power, because it allows the SNP to make ever more swinging cuts to local authority funding and say, well, we gave you the power to raise taxes on your people, so you can't complain. Although, of course, as Alexander Burnett pointed out yesterday, it is not necessarily your people because, for example, many people in Aberdeenshire will be driving to work in Aberdeen, where any parking levy would be collected and spent. And as Pauline McNeill said, in a powerful contribution, these are individuals who, perhaps because of shift patterns, perhaps because of the nature of their work, may not have a safe, reliable and affordable public transport alternative. They have no option but to use their cars. And yet, for the privilege, they will get hit with a tax of £500 per year. However, Mike Rumbles was right. It is the SNP's right to team up and vote this through, but that's why we brought forward amendments to exempt various groups. And what I find utterly shameful, presiding officer, is that not one SNP member agreed that we should exempt the police from a tax on doing their job. Not one felt that teachers, or for that matter school caterers or teaching assistants, should not have to pay, even where they drive in from outside a city because the public transport is insufficient. Gillian Martin intervened on me yesterday, and I know she knows and cares deeply about the lack of teachers in the North East, yet she voted not to exempt them. And not one felt that we should exempt the military or RNLI volunteers. It is staggering because surely they cannot believe that an RNLI volunteer should pay £500 a year to save lives at sea. So in conclusion, presiding officer, this is a good bill, but in one of its most fundamental, far-reaching and prejudicial clauses, it falls woefully short. And for that reason, we cannot support it at decision time.
I call on Michael Matheson to close the Government Cabinet Secretary for a minute.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I've listened with interest to the contributions which have been made here this afternoon, because this is an important piece of legislation and a very significant piece of legislation. It gives provision to a range of very important policy areas, for example, in low emission zones, helping to drive up air quality improvement within particularly our city areas. For the reasons that John Finney, I think, very well highlighted about tackling some of the health challenges which are associated with poor health quality, because we want Scotland to have the best quality of air for any other European country. And low emission zones have an important part to play in that. And I'm delighted the way in which Glasgow City Council have shown leadership in this area, with the first of those low emission zones being in operation since the turn of the year, demonstrating already the benefits that can come from this approach, and the new provisions which are provided in this bill will help to support that further. Alongside that, the additional provisions that the bill makes for improving bus services and to drive up bus patronage through the bus service improvement partnerships, the franchising and of course also the cross-party support for providing powers for local transport authorities to be able to provide passenger services themselves, empowering them to be able to look at how services should be delivered within their own communities with the discretionary powers which they now have in looking at it for their own local communities. Alongside that, the provisions to improve smart ticketing, to make sure that we have a transport system that is able to adapt to and to be able to manage new technology in a way that helps to improve connectivity and journeys. And of course, the very significant improvements which will come from parking improvements that are set out within the bill. If there is one element within this bill that I've had more contact with constituents on than any other area, it is around pavement parking and double parking. It has been an ongoing problem for decades for people, and I want to recognise the tremendous amount of work that a number of members around the chamber have made, but particularly Sandra White, over a concerted number of years in pushing this issue. And this bill deals with that matter. And I do believe the amendments that were introduced at stage 2 by Mike Rumbles help to improve on that even further. This is a bill which has been strengthened by the parliamentary process and a willingness to work at how we can improve the provisions which are contained within it, making sure that the legislation is also aligned with the key principles that are set out in our draft National Transport Strategy, a strategy which will take us forward in terms of transport priorities for the next 20 years. And also the provision that we've made around the traffic regulation matters, a matter which has been raised by, I know, a number of those within the cycling sector and local authorities as well, about the difficulties they have with the existing system and how they can be unduly bureaucratic and they can compromise progress being made. And that's why I want to use the review as an opportunity to look at how we can improve on that. And also, it is a bill that has a modest discretionary power for local authorities to look at providing workplace parking. And for all of the exemptions that the members sought to bring forward, the reality was it wasn't the substance of providing exemptions, it was trying to make the system unworkable in order to frustrate the process. And the key element of this is that the very provisions that are set out within this bill are provisions which are there that allow local authorities to apply every discretion that the Tories and the Labour Party or anyone else may want to have with workplace parking. But the reality is, here this evening, Presiding Officer, it is a bit rich. The Tories trying to portray themselves as though they stand up for the workers. There is one thing that the Tories don't do, and that they don't stand up for the workers. Voting against this bill, Presiding Officer, means you're voting against all the positive improvements that will come from this legislation. This is a good bill, and it deserves the support of Parliament here tonight.
Thank you. And that concludes the debate on the Transport Scotland Bill. Time is tight, so I'm now moving on to the next item of business. You better be fleet of foot.